Namaskar, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. It is my great honor to be here with Shri Mohan Bhagavat and with all of you at Gujarat University and at this Bharatiya Vichar Manch. And I must thank the organizers and the wonderful crowd for being here, and also for Jay Nandakumar, who invited me to this event originally some months ago. There is a very crucial change going on in the world today, and there's a very crucial change going on in India or Bharat, which are related. And I wanted to discuss these in some detail. A little bit about our background. I am coming to you after working in the Vedic field for a few decades. And our background is a little different in that we came to yoga and Vedas from a point outside of India, from a different language, a different culture, and came into this tradition in a kind of intuitive way. I started with the yoga teachings at a fairly young age, including teachers like Aurobindo, Raman Maharshi, Paramahansa Yogananda. And in that study, I was drawn into the deeper examination of the Vedanta, the Advaita Vedanta of Shankara particularly. And that stage, we had people in the West who knew yoga, but Vedanta was not very well studied or known. And then, through Sri Aurobindo, I came into the Vedic teachings, which was practically unknown in the Western world or studied beyond a very superficial level. And that drew me into a deeper study of the Hindu or the Sanatana Dharma, the tradition behind that. Because what we've seen in the Western world is people tend to pick up things by pieces only. A yoga technique here, a mantra there, a guru there, and not understanding the basic tradition that it comes from. And on that Vedic foundation, for various reasons, not time to go into, I was also drawn into the Ayurvedic medicine and also into the Jyotish. But it's very interesting to note that my main Ayurvedic teacher in Mumbai, Dr. B.L. Vashta, was a major writer and teacher for RSS. So I got to know RSS before I heard the propaganda against it. And to tell you an interesting story of coincidence, Dr. Vashta told me that he would be introducing me to a Hindu social and intellectual group. And I had just come from America, and that day I looked into my suitcase and I only found a pair of khaki shorts. So I put on the khaki shorts, came, and without knowing, and everybody laughed. Everybody said, "You must be one of us because you didn't even know." So that association for me has been going on for a good 30 years. And in this process, sometimes I do too many things. I've been drawn into a lot of various studies and issues from ancient India to modern India to educational issues, even sometimes semi-political issues. And what I learned early on, also someone in Mumbai, I remember there was a program of medical research in yoga, and there were basically 9 Indian medical doctors, and I was the only representative of Ayurveda. And someone from the audience then told me that in India we only honor something when it's been re-imported. So I've been in an unusual situation where in the West I'm bringing the Vedic teachings to people in the West, but in India I'm also coming here to give more value or to help people gain a greater respect or understanding of the Vedic teachings in Bharat, in India itself, where they have been very much neglected. And in the process, I've had many dialogues with people on the left. I even remember many years ago, I had a meeting with Sadashiv Dange, who was one of the leading communist thinkers in India. That was shortly before he had passed away. And he made the remark to us that in spite of all of his Marxist study, his wife was still dedicated to the Bhagavad Gita, and he could not turn her away from it. And he said the Gita, you couldn't defeat it because it has Maya, it has Brahman, it has Atma, whatever point of view, you can integrate, change, and transform. So in the process, we have had a lot of experience and study and work with Hindu yoga teachings in India and also outside of India, Bharat as well. So the next thing I want to examine is the status of the Hindu yoga Vedic teachings globally. And for example, when we started with Ayurveda in the United States 30, 40 years ago, it was almost unknown. Now we have Ayurvedic centers in most of the cities, most of the ashrams, most of the yoga centers, not only in the United States, but also to a great extent throughout the Western world. And what we've seen throughout the world is that a kind of Vedic, Hindu, yogic, Ayurvedic counterculture has emerged in most of the countries. Not at an academic level, not really at a political level so much, but at the level of the study and the people who are into spirituality and healing overall. As you know, Hindu gurus have been traveling all over the world since Vivekananda, establishing various centers and so forth. But what we've seen in recent years is a greater integration of the teachings. For example, even in India, the gurus who did not some decades ago offer these things have Ayurveda, Jyotish, Vedanta, Sanskrit, all these things. So there is a worldwide spread of the Hindu Dharma and the Bharatiya Sanskriti, even among people who do not have a background coming out of India. At the same time, there has been the remarkable diaspora of the Hindus and the Indians worldwide, particularly to the United States, UK, Australia, and the English-speaking countries, but also elsewhere as well. And as many of you know, in the United States today, the people of Hindu religious background have the best level of education, the best level of affluence, and the best level of keeping their children in their religion, and also the lowest divorce rates of any of the populations. And they've come into all the higher echelons of society, whether it's the high tech, or whether it is the doctors, whether it is the media people. So they have had a definite impact, and the term Hindu in the West has changed because of that. There used to be, the Hindus were the backward, the superstitious, the uneducated missionary stereotypes, and now they're at the cutting edge of the society. Now, the same thing has happened with the Hindu thought, whether it is the Vedantic ideas coming into modern physics, whether it is the Ayurvedic ideas coming into modern medicine, whether it is emphasis on things like asana, pranayama, mantra, meditation. These are entering into the Western culture overall, and even Hindu Sanskrit words, guru, prana, mantra, shakti, dhyana, etc., are now common words in the different dialects of the Western world. So in our work, we have gone through South America, Brazil quite a bit, Mexico recently, and North America, throughout Europe, even Israel, And Russia, in fact, it's interesting to note we found the greatest interest in the Hindu teachings actually in Russia in terms of the number of people. Even though there's not a total government support for it, in the common people there is a great respect. And we also find that throughout all these different countries. And this is happening at a couple of levels. And the first thing to understand, it is a spontaneous movement in the cultures of the people who want a higher knowledge. It's not coming from academia, and it's also never, or not until recently, being really supported by the government of India. The spreading of yoga, Vedanta, etc., has pretty much gone on of its own accord and of its own power. And it's also integrated with some of the native traditions. We work with Native American traditions in the United States, and they have much in common with the Hindu overall. We've also done some work with the pagan traditions in Europe, Celtic, Germanic, Slavic. It's interesting that today in Lithuania, the pagan traditions are still legal, and they recognize the connection with India. Some years ago, we were in Bulgaria, and the National Museum of Bulgaria traces the Bulgarian people to India. And then I'll only mention this briefly, but we've done a lot of research relative to history and movements of people. And it's very interesting to note that India, Bharat, has always been one of, if not the main cradle of civilization in the world. And we can see this going both east and west. If you look to the east of India, you can see how the Buddhist and Hindu influences spread through Indonesia, Indochina, China, Japan. Japan has Hindu temples to Vedic deities even today. Recently, they did some archaeological research in the Philippines, and they found the oldest inscriptions in the Philippines were in scripts connected to Brahmi and talking about Hindu deities. Shaivism had also spread as far as the Philippines. And if we go back to the origins of all these Southeast Asian cultures, Thailand, Myanmar, Indonesia, their oldest level of history and archaeology already shows influences via India and teachings, deities, and practices. So we can say they belong to the greater Bharat, or the greater India. They were not really separate cultures. Islam didn't come to dominate even Indonesia until around, I think it was around the 16th century. So in some ways, you find some more Hindu Dharma there than in even some parts of India. Now, we all know through study of the history of the Indo-European languages and how even English shares certain terms and grammar via Sanskrit. But what people haven't realized is that the archaeology has shown us that we have a civilization from the Saraswati, Drishadvati, Kurukshetra region going back 10,000 years by way of the archaeology. And for those of you in Gujarat, Vedic civilization was always an oceanic or maritime civilization. The ocean is the dominant image. Brigu Varuni, Brigu Kutch is here. The Saraswati used to come down to the ocean here in Kutch. So Gujarat was the maritime oceanic side of the Vedic civilization, through which that civilization spread by sea to the Persian Gulf, even to Africa, all the way to Asia, Sri Lanka. It was already propagating the teachings, the trade, the culture, going back for many thousands of years. But even if we look through Central Asia and Western Europe, these areas were dominated by Indo-Iranian people going back thousands of years. Even the so-called Slavic people have a dialect that's closer to the Indian languages than the other European languages. And people like the Shakas or the Scythians had kingdoms from northwest India all the way to the Danube in Europe. There was a constant flow of people. Civilizational issues are important. I'll discuss those a bit, but one point I always like to make is that there is really no such continent as Europe. Europe is an open highway through Central Asia, the steppes, the Ukrainian region, and there's always been a movement of people and ideas from Bharat across Central Asia through that region, as well as further south through Persia, Iran, Greece, and all of that. And we find even 4,000 years ago, the ancient Middle East, the Anatolia had Mitannis who had a Sanskritic language, who intermarried with the pharaohs of Egypt. There were tremendous connections. So the main influence we see is not the movement of culture coming into India from the West in ancient times, but the expansion of the Vedic civilization, Indic ideas from east to west, through Central Asia, and also through certain trade routes. It wasn't until about 1,500 years to 1,000 years ago that the Turkish people came into Central Asia and displaced the Indo-Iranian people. Even as late as 1,000 years ago, this whole region north of Kashmir, Tarim Basin in what is now called China's Turkestan, had a culture connected to India and Sanskritic language and text. So in other words, the Bharatiya civilization has spread east and west throughout history, as far as Europe. Even the Celtic people said they came from the Shakas or the Scythians, going eventually back to India, and then spreading east all the way as far as Japan. No other civilization in the world has had that extensive influence and culture, language, and ideas for such a long period of time, and even continuing. Even a lot of what we like about so-called Western civilization, for example, democracy and science, these basically go back to the pagan Greeks, and they also had their connections via India. In fact, most of Greek civilization was in Asia, not in Europe, and extended into Bactria, Afghanistan, and even India as a whole. And then we have more esoteric connections, for example, going to places like Mexico and South America. We have a people called Mayas in southern Mexico. And Mayas are famous for two things. One is architecture, and the other is astronomy. And in the ancient text, we have Maya Mata for the Vastu Shastra, and we have Asura Maya as the teacher of the Surya Siddhanta for the Jyotish. And we have some similarities of archaeology and artifacts. Even visiting Hawaii some years ago, island of Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we talked to some of the senior grandmother women gurus, and they said that that India was the ultimate land that they were connected to. So, essentially, Bharat is rising as a dominant spiritual civilization in the world, as it has been. It's only been for a few centuries that it has really been suppressed by outside invaders and all the other problems that came. And so there was an effort then to suppress or eliminate or destroy this Bharatiya civilization, whether it was the burning of Nalanda, whether it was the British closing down Ayurvedic or other schools. But in spite of that, this tradition is coming up in a major way, and it has a major impact for the future of humanity. In the future of humanity today, we are moving towards of course, we are in this age of information technology and knowledge-based civilization. And India has always been a knowledge-based civilization. And India as a civilization not only honored the outer knowledge like science and mathematics, but also the adhyatmic or the inner knowledge, the science of consciousness, yoga and Vedanta. There is a lot of debate today about science in the Vedas. Certain things we can say. One is that mathematics is all there in the Vedas. Not only the decimal system, Yajurveda has numbers from 1 followed by 1 by 12 zeros after it, but also 360, 108, all these mathematical numbers are there. And there was been this debate as, if science came from the Greeks did not have a mathematical system to compute. So that was that decimal system came. So we do know that India was a source of mathematics. Medicine, Shushrut, is the father of plastic surgery. And we also have other connections. But what I'd like to say is that the ultimate science is the science of consciousness. And that science of consciousness has always been best developed in India. It has all the Yoga Shastras, the Vedantic Shastras, the Buddhist and Jain teachings, and it has been elaborated at an experiential way, something that we can directly know inside of ourselves. Modern science has not yet understood we could say, the independence of a science of consciousness. They are still trying to interpret consciousness relative to the body and the brain. Whereas we know through the Vedantic thought, consciousness transcends body and mind. That is the greatest insight, I would say, of all science that has ever been made. That the consciousness, the seer, the knower, transcends body and mind because it is beyond object, form, gunas, elements, numbers, and all of that. So that science of consciousness also remains essential. So there's a global crisis today. There's also the crisis within India or Bharat. Global crisis is about how do we deal with this new technology and integrate it into our society? And there are many problems coming up. We don't have time to address them, but we can say very clearly for some of you who would like to understand, is that the information technology is changing the nervous system of people. It is almost like a drug at a certain level. It needs some compensation. So in the Western world, we're seeing loss of independent thought, dependence upon the machine. We're also seeing the breakdown of the family and the social order. In spite of the affluence and the technology in the West, there's a lot of psychological confusion and unhappiness. And to some extent, that is also going to be coming here as well. And the question isn't about the technology. We have to use the technology. The question is, how do we compensate for the technology and how it affects our nervous system and social order? And how do we best implement it? And for that, we need to develop, again, science of consciousness, awareness. Information is not intelligence. Information is simply data. Intelligence is the capacity to make independent judgments. It requires the awakened or the higher buddhi. We have to cultivate buddhi, attention, awareness, yoga and meditation into the schools. To some extent it's happening in other countries besides India. But it is very essential that we have an independent mindset apart from the technology, or the technology can overwhelm and disturb us. Sometimes Vedanta teaches that the world is Maya. It's an appearance that has a different reality. But today I like to say the media is the Maya of the Maya. And so we've gone to that level. So, and then as this global technology, media culture spreads, the spiritual emptiness is drawing people back to Bharatiya teachings. The main problem, again, as I mentioned earlier, people get things piece by piece. Or they try in the West, for example, recently they're trying to redefine pranayama as cardiac breathing. They want to take out the piece and forget the background system as a whole. So in our work, we've always been emphasizing the integral connection of all the Vedic teachings. You need to learn yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, all these things together. And the background teachings of the Hindu Sanatana Dharma is there. And this leads us to the other issue, which is the challenge via Hinduism, Hindu Dharma, both globally and also in India itself. You know, the Hinduism is the third largest religion in the world. It's the largest of the dharmic traditions, the indigenous traditions, the pagan traditions, the pluralistic traditions, and the traditions that aim at experiential spirituality at an individual level more so than at propagating any particular dogma or belief or faith. So this puts the Hindu Dharma in a unique place, but a place where it is often misunderstood because applying it or looking at it in terms of Abrahamic concepts. Sin, faith, salvation, even God, Scripture. A lot of these terms from the Abrahamic traditions do not work and are misleading in the Hindu context. And as long as they're used, there becomes that tendency to make Hinduism inferior because it cannot stack up as as one book, one God, one Savior, one prophet, and all the rest of it, which is a narrowing down or a scaling back. And then we have the idea that Hinduism, Hindu Dharma, is a way of life and not a religion. But even this causes some trouble. For example, if you tell Hindu children in the West that Hindu Dharma is a way of life and not a religion, what do they fill out on their forms when they have to identify their religion? And as a religion in other countries, the Hindu Dharma has the benefits, legal benefits of a religion. If you're not recognized as a religion, you cannot open religious institutions. You cannot have legal marriage by the religion. You cannot gain government benefits, nonprofit, all of that. So actually, what we're saying is that all the countries of the world should recognize Hindu Dharma as a legal religion. And I have to tell you, countries like Russia, even France, do not. They do not. Most of the countries in the world do not. Only the English-speaking countries where Hindus have come in, and recently Italy was able to get it because of the Italian Hindus. But I'll tell you a funny story. This was a few years ago. The Italian Hindu Union, for getting Hinduism recognized, they invited all the ambassadors from the different countries to come. The Indian ambassador, you can tell what administration it was from, refused to come because it said we are a secular country. So that is the crux of the issue. Even in the Indian context, this Sabarimala issue, part of the legal issue is the argument that because Hinduism is a way of life and not a religion, the state can own your institutions. And because you allow people of other religions to come in, then they should also have a say as to how your institutions are run. It's like saying if I invite guests in my house, they should have part ownership into my house. But that is part of the challenges here that the left, the Marxist, and now even saying that asato ma sadgamaya is a religious instruction and therefore we should question it at a legal level is coming from this confusion of thought. So on one hand, we have to emphasize that Hindu Dharma deserves all the legal rights of a religion. At the same time, it is something more than the religions of the Western world. It cannot be circumscribed by faith or belief. And it doesn't isolate itself from art, from science, from the whole of learning, the whole of life, the whole of culture. And that is why you cannot separate Hindu Dharma from India or Bharat. If you do, there's no Bharat. In fact, the world does not need another socialist country, another capitalist country, another United States, another China, another Pakistan. It needs Bharat. It needs India. What people look to India for throughout the world is its adhyatmic, yogic, dharmic traditions, and that is what they honor. Bharat is the land of the rishis, and for India to rise, it must arise as Bharat. And people can say, where did the term India come from? Sapta Sindhu, Hapta Hindu, Indica, whatever. But we must remember that all the way in Rig Veda itself, the Bharatas are the dominant dynasty. King Bharat is there. And the main kings mentioned in Rig Veda are all part of the Puru Bharat dynasty. Same thing occurs in the Brahmanas. And of course we know Mahabharata, and even in the Buddhist and Jain, they refer to India as Bharatvarsha. So that the teachings, the dharmic teachings, some pieces taken off, or they're looked at according to the Western civilizational ideas and concepts. It's sort of like insisting that everything should be taught in a certain language. People who speak another language are then not accepted as having value. So today, there needs to be this arising of Bharat as a nation, a culture, a civilization, and above all, a dharmic civilization, and connecting with its past, affirming its presence, and envisioning a future. A future. One thing we had recently, we have developed through the India Foundation a Center for Soft Power, which means cultural diplomacy and sharing and spreading all these Indic, Vedic teachings, yoga, not only yoga, Ayurveda, but even the Indian culture. Today, India once more affirming its role as the creator of civilization. India has been the most dynamic country for developing civilization throughout the world, if we include the whole scope of time, and also looking to a greater planetary, global civilization that integrates the ancient roots with the future, that integrates the indigenous people, that integrates the plants, the animals, the ecosystem, that honors the spiritual traditions of all humanity, that is not based upon Western civilization over all, or Islam over all, or Christianity over all, or even anything over all. It's based upon awakening our deeper spiritual heritage. All humanity comes from a rishi culture, not just simply from technology, not just simply from urban planning, not just simply... See, the Western world tends to look at everything in terms of the physical body. For archaeology, you need a skeleton, you need some ruins somewhere. And advanced civilization doesn't always leave ruins. They may clean up after themselves. And advanced yogis don't always leave a personality cult following them. They don't have to necessarily create a religion in their name. It's about a change of consciousness and a change of awareness. And then in the India context, there is this greater battle going on, because the same dichotomy you have in the outer world and the greater world of Western versus all these things, you also have that in India itself, with the Marxists been given so much power, with the Congress outsourced its intellectual wing to the Marxists. And these challenges are still going on because of their role in the media. For example, I think it was Shashi Tharoor made this interesting equivalence. Hindu, Hindutva. And the logic behind that is that South Indians, they've always been trying to separate South India from North India. And if you associate Hindi with Hindu and Hindutva, then you separate South India from North India, which is necessary. Why? Because in South India, they actually follow the Hindu traditions better than they do in the North. So this redefinition of Hinduism, Hindutva, Hindu Dharma is very important. I'm running out of my time here. But just to put it in a closing context, is that we should honor and bring together all of our terminology. In other words, Hinduism, Hindu Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, Manava Dharma, Yoga Dharma, Veda Dharma, Vishwa Dharma, it's all different words for the same thing, and Hindutva is also there. Let's not create these little semantical games. Let's look at the deeper culture and civilization. So Bharat represents the eternal, timeless, spiritual civilization, culture of humanity. It is awakening today. It needs a greater awakening so that not only India but also the world can deal with this new technology, the new media, and preserve this adhyatmic spiritual vision in spite of or even through the development of technology. And then when they have the artificial intelligence, etc., to free us from labor, we know what to do. We do sadhana and meditation. We just don't simply run off for more games and entertainment. So with these words, I will close this. And again, it's my great honor to be here with Shri Mohan Bhagwat. And he has given tremendous guidance, and he has brought out about a revolution of thought in Bharat this last year or two, and we're looking forward to where he's going to guide us next.